Hello everyone, I'm back and I hope you had a great reading week with a little bit of relaxing time. And today we are starting a new unit which is about vitamins. And as you know, we have fat soluble and water soluble vitamins. We are going to start with the fat soluble ones. And the first one in line is vitamin A. So it was originally discovered by its ability to prevent night blindness or xerophthalmia. So you're going to see later on why vitamin A is important or is related to vision and why it was associated with night blindness. But vitamin A is a generic descriptor for compounds with the qualitative biological activity of retinol. And it includes retinoids, which are retinol, retinal, and retinoic acid. And we also have carotenoids. And I think the most famous that I think everybody knows is beta-carotene, which is often spoken about, and you can find it mostly in yellow vegetables. Carrots, for instance, is a typical one. But you also have alpha-carotene, lycopene, and lutein. And these are all molecules that make up this group of this family of that we call retinoids. So what are the active forms of vitamin A? What are the forms that actually play an important functional role in our bodies? So we have retinol here on the left, and as you can see here, it's a compound that has these rings, and it's a fat soluble, typical fat soluble molecule. And we have retinol on the right. So in this retinol and retinol, they are interconvertible. In other words, you can make one into another, so they can go back and forth. You can make retinol into retinol and retinol into retinol. Now, retinol can also be converted into retinoic acid. And it's important that once retinol becomes retinoic acid, it's irreversible. In other words, we cannot go back to retinol, so it stays as retinoic acid. So once vitamin A, retinol in this particular case, is converted into retinoic acid, it ends there. So it will have to be metabolized or transformed into something else in the form of retinoic acid, but it cannot go back to any of the other two isoforms that we spoke before. So these are the three active forms of vitamin A. I mentioned in the beginning that vitamin A is important for vision. But what is its role in vision? So if we start this diagram from the left side here, so what we see is a rod cell, and it contains rhodopsin, which is made up of a molecule called opsin and also cis-retinol. As you can see, cis-retinol is the active form, one of the active forms of vitamin A. So these two together, opsin and cis-retinol, when you are in the dark, for instance, when there is no light at all, these two are together. So now what happens is that when light goes on, so the visible light actually splits opsin from cis-retinol. So these two components of your rod cell in your eye, it's split by visible light. So you can see here, so you have opsin separated from cis-retinol. So now cis-retinol is converted into another form called trans-retinol. And then it's converted back into cis-retinol, and it binds again to opsin and forms again rhodopsin. So it's a cyclic process, if you will. So every time there is light entering your eye, it provokes this separation of opsin and cis-retinol, and this generates an electrical potential that sends a message to your brain that allows you to see. So it triggers vision in your brain based on electrical activity that is generated in your eye and now obviously transferred to your brain through the optic nerve. and it allows you to see. So clearly, it's important because cis-retinol or retinol, this form of vitamin A, is an important component of the system that allows vision to occur. So again, as I said, when there is light entering your eye, it splits these two compounds, and then it forms trans-retinol, and then it goes back into cis-retinol, and then it binds again to opsin and forms rhodopsin again. So this restores the structure of rhodopsin in your eye. So every time that you have this process, this is splitting and recycling of this process, you have vision taking place because it generates an electrical potential that allows a message to be sent to your brain, and that converts into an image that you see wherever you are, that there is light. So the configuration of cis and trans retinol is what we have down here. So this is retinol again. In the cis configuration, as you can see, it is a molecule that has a bend. So there is a kink to the molecules, there is an angle, and this is the kind of molecule that is in the absence of light. What happens is that this molecule is in this configuration and it's bound to opsin. So when light splits it, it separates, and the separation causes the retinol to take a different conformation, which is this configuration that you see here on the right, which is the trans configuration, which is linearized. So, but this linearization is transient, so lasts just for a short period of time, and then it becomes cis again, and then it can bind again to opsin, and this allows the formation again of rhodopsin. So it's a cyclic process that depends on the presence of light. So now you can see that if you don't have enough vitamin A in your organism, what happens is that you cannot properly form rhodopsin, and if you cannot form this molecule properly, you cannot trigger this process that separates and reassembles again and allows this electrical potential to be generated in your eye and transmitted to your brain. So vitamin A is a critical component of your vision system. So this is how it happens. So that's why it was discovered, vitamin A was actually discovered associated with night blindness or inability of people to actually see when there is very little light or there is dim light. So there's not enough shifting or separation of this rhodopsin molecule into these two components and recycling it back to allow this electrical potential to be generated and then the images to be formed in your brain. So it's a crucial component of the vision system that we have in our eye. So what's the recommended intake of vitamin A? For men is approximately 900 micrograms, and for women approximately 700 micrograms. And the upper limit is 3,000 micrograms per day. And the difference here again is because men require a little bit more because the amount of body fat in men is slightly less than women. So women can store more, so therefore they don't need as much on a day-to-day basis. So the recommended daily allowances for men is slightly higher, in this case 900 micrograms, for women 700, and if you reach a maximum of 3,000 beyond that, it can become toxic. So what are the dietary sources of vitamin A? So we have animal products, mostly beef, liver, dairy products, chicken, egg yolk, and milk. Those are all very rich in vitamin A because they contain fat, and the fat in these foods, they also bring in vitamin A. But you can also get it from plant-derived foods, and you get it basically as spinach, carrots, mango, apricots, pumpkin, cantaloupe, broccoli, and sweet potatoes. But keep in mind this, you get the retinoids, and you get it in the form of a beta carotene or alpha carotene or lycopene, as I mentioned before. It's not the fully active form of vitamin A. It needs to be further modified in your body to be converted into the active form of vitamin A. So the animal products, you have the fully active form of the vitamin, but in plant-derived forms you have what's called carotenoids, And these carotenoids, they have to be converted into vitamin A, or the fully active form of vitamin A. But 1 cup of carrots, for instance, or sweet potatoes, provides the RDA of vitamin A for men and women. So it's not difficult to get. Most people want a diet with variety of, with a wide variety of foods. You can basically get all the vitamin A that you need. Again, just 1 cup of carrots or sweet potatoes provides the RDA of vitamin A for men and women. So what are the symptoms of deficiency? As I mentioned before, xerophthalmia, and because it impairs the vision, especially when the light is dimmed. So if you don't have bright light to really cause that separation of opsin from retinol, you can't really trigger the vision process. And those people who are deficient, if there's not you have to have a lot of light, because then you need to have a very strong signal in your eye to be able to see. But when you don't have enough vitamin A, what happens is that weak light, or if you don't have a bright light, you may not be able to see properly. And that's what happens when it becomes dark, or at night when you have limited amount of light entering your eye. So that's why it's important or it's more obvious in those people who have difficulty seeing things when it gets a little darker, especially at night. But it also impairs growth. It affects immunity, the immune system, and also reproductive function. So it's a very complex, so there's a lot of different functions for vitamin A that are important for normal health. Toxicity is usually caused by fatigue, bone and joint pain. There's also spontaneous abortion if you take too much, and also birth defects. And most of this spontaneous, this deleterious effects of vitamin A is because there is an accumulation of retinoic acid, and retinoic acid can influence gene expression, and because of that it can promote birth defects. But it can also act on your gut, and it can cause nausea, diarrhea, liver damage. It can actually impair your vision, called blurred vision. Actually, it's just too much vitamin A can actually impair the ability or that recycling process of rhodopsin to occur. And then it can also lead to hair loss and also skin disorders. And a lot of them, as I said, most of these are because of there is a significant amount of retinoic acid that is formed. And retinoic acid is a irreversible molecule. You cannot go back to any other, to retinol or retinol. So, and then it has very important effects on gene expression and alterations in the expression of genes that can be positive but can also be negative when you have too much. So these are the symptoms basically of deficiency. You have problems with vision, impaired growth, immunity is downregulated, and also impaired reproductive function. And if you have too much, you have fatigue, bone and joint pain, can cause spontaneous abortion, birth defects, nausea, diarrhea, liver damage, blurred vision, hair loss, and skin disorders. So it can have quite a bit of devastating effects in your body if you either deficient or too much. But it's not common to have deficiency because it is a fat-soluble vitamin, and you can accumulate in your fat under your skin, so it's very difficult for you to develop deficiency. It's more likely if you take too much, especially if you take supplements that contain a lot of vitamin A, it may cause toxicity because it accumulates in your adipose tissue. But other than that, in normal feeding, under normal feeding conditions, it's not nowadays very rarely you see deficiency or toxicity of vitamin A. So the next vitamin that I want to speak about is D. And this has received a lot of attention, especially because of the effect that it has on calcium metabolism. And we are going to discuss this more in detail. But there are two main forms of vitamin D. One is what we call ergocalciferol or vitamin D2, and the other one is cholecalciferol or vitamin D3. So vitamin D2 is mostly found in plants, and vitamin D3 is more in animal products, and the one actually that we form in our skin when we are exposed to light. We're going to understand a little bit more. But these two molecules, they are called corticosteroids, and the reason why it's called corticosteroids is because one of the rings that forms the structure is considered broken. So what do I mean by broken? As you can see here in this image, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 rings here. So this ring down here is open. So there is no, it's not a closed ring, it's an open ring. And that's why it's called broken. And that's what the name that is given to this molecule is corticosteroid, because of this contains this 4 ring structure, but one of the rings, specifically this one, is open, it's not fully closed. So both of them, vitamin D2 and vitamin D3, they both have this broken ring here, so they're what we call corticosteroids. And again, D2 is found in plants, D3 in animal products, and this is the kind of vitamin that we make in our skin when we expose our body to UVB light from the sun. So this is one of those vitamins that break that original description that we cannot make in our body, because vitamin D is actually, if you don't take it from the diet, your body can make it. So it's an exception of the rule for the definition of what a vitamin is. So now let's understand how this process of vitamin D in our body works. So as I said, there are 2 sources of vitamin D. You can get it from exposure to sunlight. So we are going to start with the sun here on the left side. So you have UV, especially, as I said, UVB light. It hits your skin, and it actually converts the 7-dehydroxycholesterol into what is called pre-vitamin D3. So first important thing, vitamin D comes, your body makes it from cholesterol. So there is this conversion of 7-dehydroxycholesterol, which is in your skin, into vitamin or pre-vitamin D3, and this is caused by UV light. So when you expose your skin to UV light, this response, or this takes place, and you form what's called pre-vitamin D3. Now, we can also get vitamin D from the food, as I mentioned before. We can have vitamin D2 that comes from plants, and D3 that comes from animal products. So this pre-vitamin D3 that is formed in your skin becomes vitamin D3. There is an additional step that occurs in your blood that converts it into vitamin D3. Now, vitamin D3 has to undergo through important hydroxylation steps, because the vitamin D that we take from the diet is not active. In order for it to be active, it has to undergo 2 hydroxylations. In other words, you have to put 2 hydroxyl groups on the molecule. So the first hydroxylation occurs once the vitamin is in your circulation, and either because it came from the food that you ate, or because the skin is producing under the stimulation of the UV light. In both cases, vitamin D3 in your blood has to go through the liver, and there is an enzyme called 25-hydroxylase. So what 25-hydroxylase does is to add a hydroxyl group in the carbon positioned at the 25 spot within the molecule. So the hydroxylase is specific to add a hydroxyl group to that carbon in the position 25 of the chain, or the hydrocarbon chain of the molecule. So now with that, you form what we call 25-hydroxy vitamin D3. You can see here. So now it's still not active. It needs to undergo one additional hydroxylation step, and it travels to the kidney. There is another enzyme called 1-alpha hydroxylase that will now add another hydroxyl group to the carbon 1 of the hydrocarbon chain in the molecule. So with that taking place, we have now what is called 1,25 hydroxy D3 or calcitriol. So this is the fully active form of vitamin D in our body. So everything that happened all the way to here was a process to form the active vitamin D. And what we get from the food, or we get from initially from the exposure to sunlight, is a vitamin that is not fully active. It's not until it goes through the liver and kidney, so it has to circulate in your blood, go through these two organs, and in those organs, two hydroxylations will occur, and we form 1,25 again, because positions 1 and 25 of the molecule, you're going to have two hydroxyl groups added. And that's the fully active form called calcitriol. So calcitriol is well known for its ability to stimulate your bone or to release calcium from your bone, so you increase calcium in the circulation. Normally, vitamin D is really required because it plays a very important role in regulating calcium metabolism. So calcium has to be maintained within a very narrow range in your body, because every cell in your system, in your organism, requires calcium. It can be for muscle contraction, it is for electrolyte balance, for nerve impulses, for many different things in your functions in your cells, you need calcium. So calcium has to be very, very tightly regulated all the time. So if you are low in calcium, you're going to require vitamin D, or vitamin D plays an important role because it stimulates or increases circulating calcium levels. And it does this by two mechanisms. One of it is by taking calcium from the bone. So that's what we call calcium resorption, as it's mentioned here. So it takes away calcium from the bone, takes calcium from the bone and puts it into circulation, so your system can maintain that regulation of calcium levels. The other very important thing that vitamin D does is that it acts in your gut and it stimulates your intestine to absorb calcium from the diet. So normally what we see is that you look at vitamin D and calcium together. Why is it? Because vitamin D has many functions, but one of the most important ones is that it regulates calcium levels in your blood. So when calcium is low, it stimulates. Vitamin D plays an important role to maintain calcium elevated in your circulation, or maintain within that narrow range. And it does so because it takes some calcium from the bone, but also stimulates your gut to take a lot of calcium from the diet. So obviously what we want to have is a situation where you can absorb a lot of calcium from the diet, so you don't have to take as much from the bone. So the idea of taking vitamin D with calcium is because the vitamin D will stimulate your gut to take more calcium, and with that you don't need to take as much from the bone. So it's kind of an indirect effect that could actually preserve bone structure. But the most important function of vitamin D, the active form, is to increase the absorption of calcium in your intestine, so you have maintained the supply of calcium to your organism within a very narrow range, so you don't have oscillations or alterations in calcium metabolism. And again, if your diet is poor in calcium, your body cannot afford just not to take it. So it will have to find a way to get it, and it gets it from the bone. So, but we want to get it more from the diet, so you don't have to take as much from the bone. So that's the story, and that's why vitamin D has received a lot of attention, because with the aging population, and especially with osteoporosis being a major issue for the elderly, the idea of taking vitamin D or using vitamin D as a supplement is because it might improve the intestinal absorption, so therefore you take less from the bone, so you keep your bone structure intact as you age. So, but what is the vitamin D recommendation? So adults between 19 and 70 years of age is approximately 600 international units per day, or 15 micrograms per day. Now, if you're older than 70, so then the recommendation is slightly higher, is about 800 international units per day or 20 micrograms per day. And this is because, again, as we age, we tend to lose calcium from the bone, so you want to make sure that you have enough vitamin D in the system that stimulates absorption of calcium from the gut, so you keep it, you take it from the diet, so you don't have to get it from, or you don't take it as much from the bone. The upper limit is approximately 4,000 international units a day. That's what the official recommendation is. 600 international units if you're between 19 and 70, and 800 if you're older than 70 years of age. And the upper limit is set at 4,000 international units per day. So again, it's a vitamin that is stored in your adipose tissue. So it's not common you can maintain a certain amount in your adipose tissue. So whenever your concentration lowers in your blood, your adipose tissue can release and maintain a relatively constant supply of vitamin D in the system. But it's surprisingly common, or it's very common that people develop deficiency of vitamin D, especially here in Canada, in places where we have very little exposure to sunlight, especially for such a long period as in the winter, that we cover up. We are all bundled up because it's cold, so we have very little exposure. Not only the sun is not not strong enough, but also whenever we go out, we cover up our skin, so we have very little exposure to sunlight. So it's common, very common for people, especially in North America, and this where we live, especially in Canada, to have low levels of vitamin D in the circulation. So a supplementation seems to be always recommended because of that particular feature. So what are the dietary sources of vitamin D? So egg yolks and fatty fish such as salmon, mackerel, sardines, and tuna, they naturally contain substantial amounts of vitamin D, and obviously because this is where the fat is. So you need to have fat to carry a fat-soluble vitamin. So it makes sense that in these foods that contain a significant amount, a large amount of fat, that they are also going to be rich in vitamin D and other fat-soluble vitamins. We also have it in cow's milk, infant formula, and this is because it's enriched, margarine, and these are foods that normally, again, vitamin D is added because it's actually required by the Canadian government that these foods are enriched with vitamin D. But you also get it in yogurt, in cheese. They're made with vitamin D fortified milk. Goat's milk, plant-based beverage such as soy beverage because they contain fat and they are also enriched with vitamin D. And in some orange juices. Again, not because oranges are rich in vitamin D, it's just because it's added. It's enriched with vitamin D. In the process of actually industrializing the juice or making the juice available for you as a product, the industry actually adds vitamin D to it. So these are the main sources that you can get of food. You can get of vitamin D in foods. What are the symptoms of deficiency? So rickets in children and osteomalacia, which means soft bones, and osteoporosis in adults. So rickets is usually children. What is the feature of rickets is that the legs become bent. And this is because as the child grows, increases body weight, but if the bones are not strong enough, because there is not enough calcium deposited in the bone, what happens is that the weight of the structure bends the bone. So this is what is typical in children in underdeveloped countries where they're exposed to extreme poverty. You probably never see that in Canada, but if you go to countries where they have very limited access to food and restricted supply of sources of vitamin A, or vitamin D, what happens is that as they grow, they don't have, the bones don't become strong enough, and what happens is the legs become bowed, becomes bent, and this is typical of what we call rickets. Now, if you're a grown-up, if you're an adult, you pass that stage. So now what happens is that you develop a different condition called osteomalacia, which is soft bones. It's a stage prior to osteoporosis. So you start losing calcium from the bone because you don't get enough from the diet, and you don't absorb well in your gut because you lack vitamin D. So with that, what happens is that now your bones start to provide calcium to your cells, but it weakens the bone. So that's why it's called osteomalacia. It's a beginning or first stage of bone loss. And once it progresses to a more severe condition, it's classified as osteoporosis. And it's in adults, especially in the aging population, in the elderly. Now the opposite, symptoms of toxicity of vitamin D. It's called hypercalcemia. So you have an exacerbated incorporation of calcium in cells and tissues. It may not only be bone, it may also be in soft tissues. And it can also cause weakness because it disrupts the normal structure of the not only the bones but also soft tissues. You lose appetite. It can cause diarrhea, mental confusion, vomiting, and the formation of calcium deposits in soft tissues. So as I said, you can have calcium deposition in your joints, in your muscles, in your tendons, and this can really limit, can cause pain and cause severe discomfort. It can also happen in your kidneys, in your liver, in your heart. So too much calcium because of excess vitamin D can stimulate the absorption, or an excessive absorption of calcium. And it has now the opposite effect. Instead of being beneficial, it can be detrimental. And these are the typical symptoms of hypercalcemia, because it disrupts the normal balance of minerals in your system, and then can cause also calcification of soft tissues and organs. So with that, we are gonna stop here today. And we will continue on Wednesday with vitamin E and vitamin K, which are the two last fat-soluble vitamins. Bye for now. Thanks for your attention, and bye for now.